Campaigners have been staging a protest against plans to expand an incinerator plant. A public meeting is underway now to try to persuade Newcastle City Council to abandon the scheme in Byker. Opponents claim the incinerator, which converts household rubbish into energy, produces unacceptable levels of pollution and poses a real health risk.
I was shopping at Safeway and Mike was at a stall outside Safeway and they were collecting signatures on petitions and giving out information, and I just moved to the area a year ago, so I'd been here about 6 or 7 months and I had no idea there was an incinerator at the bottom of the estate.
I didn't even know there was an incinerator in Byker. When I moved here 3 years ago, I didn't know how the hot water was heated. I didn't realise we were on combined heat and power and the burnt refuse. So I went along to this meeting and I was quite shocked at some of the things that were being said about pollution, emissions from the incinerator.
All right, well, let's bring in Mike Rabley, who's from the campaign against incineration of refuse. Mr. Rabley, good morning to you.
Good morning, Mark.
Now, you've heard John Dobson state quite clearly there that both the old plant and the new plant are perfectly safe.
Well, the purpose of the current plant is that it's a form of waste treatment facility producing a waste-derived fuel for burning in the heat station. The plant was originally built in the late 70s with a fair bit of support from central government at that time, who were interested in looking at recovery of materials from the urban waste stream. Well, it's been updated and expanded to deal with the city's current waste stream. We handle some 200,000 tonnes of municipal solid waste each year at the present time. It's being obviously refurbished because it's now, the kit is over 20 years old and it needs to be modernised as well. But primarily the basis of the current proposal is we effectively deal with the city's waste stream.
Well, what the council wants to do is basically increase incineration by, we're saying, an 8-fold level. The last figure that we had for burning was 25,000 tonnes and it's gone up to 100,000 tonnes. 75,000 tonnes of the refuse is household and 15,000 is going to be car tyres.
Also, since I've been involved in the campaign, I've found out things that are really kind of upsetting and scare me, and I'd rather not have known in some ways.
I think the council have responded slowly. We've had to push them every step of the way. They've not responded proactively. They've not used joined-up thinking. We've fought them every step of the way. It was pressure from CARE, from the campaign, that led to the initial working group, which led to the initial public meeting on the 19th of January. Since that meeting, we're now going to have a working group set up which will draw in not only local people, but people from Gateshead, from Fenham, from Heaton. But if we hadn't put the pressure on the council would have signed the contract, they would have gone ahead, they wouldn't have consulted at a true level, at a deep level. So we're fighting an issue of, you know, the issue seems to be about like powerless people fighting not only big industry, but a council with a budget of hundreds of millions.
We have to encourage access to having a say in how your life is and how your environment is around you. And too often we're made to feel that we don't have any choice about things And if we all get together, we can stop this incinerator, no problem.
We did do a fairly detailed tendering exercise for the city's waste recovery contract. And the idea is we would look at possibly new build facilities and refurbishment of the new facilities. Refurbishment of existing facilities. We handle some 200,000 tonnes of municipal solid waste each year at the present time. It's being obviously refurbished because it's now, the kit is over 20 years old and it needs to be modernised as well. But primarily the basis of the current proposal is we effectively deal with the city's waste stream.
If it's upgraded, what will happen is there are recorded emissions already of dioxins, cadmium, mercury, furans and particulates. We believe that burning more household refuse and 15,000 tonnes of car tyres will increase the emissions in Byker. It's not only going to affect Byker, it's going to affect Walker, Gateshead, Gosforth, Fenham. It'll affect the whole city. And also we've been made aware from the British Journal of Cancer that within 4.6 miles of an incinerator there are a higher number of cases of various different cancers. So we're looking at cancers, we're looking at an increased incidence of asthma, people with heart disease, lung disorders are at higher risk. It's going to impact on children's health, it'll affect the immune system, you name it, it's going to have a knock-on effect.
About plans to double the amount of waste burned at an incinerator are asking their council to set up a public inquiry.
Derelict, exactly. But they can smell it all the way down nearly into Walker, you know this. It's not only here, it's up the top and down there. All the way down. There's a lot of people down there involved in it as well. It's just the smell's terrible and the smoke that used to come out. They say it wasn't smoke, but it was, they said it was steam. But it was smoke because it used to go all over. I've had all kinds of stuff out the chimney. And the smell, it's the worst for the smell. You cannot open your windows or anything. And the dust that in your house is terrible.
I do think there is an issue for local residents about the odour, but I don't think it's an actual health risk. Being exposed to an odour isn't going to cause a specific disease, but it may cause stress and anxiety. And I think that's an issue that local residents are quite right to want debated openly.
Summertime, it's worse, and weekends now. They don't work weekends now, and the rubbish is just piling up and piling up. And that's when it's starting to smell a lot. And they start to leave the door open the last 3 weeks. That door's been open, the big door at the side. And that's where we're getting the door from. We've got some stuff coming out the chimney. It was like brown, what was it? What can I describe? Like brown fur stuff. And we had hung a washing out and all the stuff came flying over. And it was thick on the ground. We phoned the Evening Chronicle and it came out. And Frank downstairs is standing with hands full of it like this. It was all over the place, all over the car park. We used to phone up over here, but they took no notice. And John Dobson, I think he's the boss over here. And we keep getting under John Dobson, but he wasn't doing anything about it, so we got the Environment Agency out. And but he works for them, you know what I mean? He is one that works for the Environment Civic Centre and that. And he came out and he says, well, it's not as bad as it's made out to be, but it is terrible.
I mean, overall, looking back over the years, one of the problems with the operation down there has been orders from the process. The question of burning waste has never really been raised. It's been odours associated with the reclamation plant. Now, in the previous process, we used to dry waste, which gave rise to a particular odour, and on some days that was particularly strong and caused residents some anxiety. The new within the refurbished plant, we wouldn't dry, so we wouldn't create that odour. So, you know, some of the problems in the past will be eliminated.
What we want is, we want a true recycling programme to be set up by by government nationally. Now, we don't want landfill. Landfill's toxic, and the runoff is going to lead to problems for hundreds of years. We don't want incineration. Incineration is the worst of all scenarios for public health. If we had a true recycling programme set up, we could create hundreds of jobs in Byker, thousands of permanent, well-paid jobs nationally.
Lots of substances are hazardous, but what we have to do is say substance X is known to be hazardous, it's known to cause damage. What we then have to be sure is, are people being exposed to it, how much of it they're being exposed to, and what risk does that give to their health. I think sometimes the debate is in the context of this is hazardous, therefore, you know, everyone will be put at risk, but of course you've got to be clear about the exposure line first.
Incinerators are responsible for 85% of the dioxin contamination in the United Kingdom. Dioxin, described as the most toxic chemical known to man. There's no safe level of dioxin. They can't say to you this dioxin from this incinerator plant poses no threat to any member of society. These are frightening figures when you really logically sit down and think about this. You think, Christ, what chance have our kids got? And they give you all this bullshit about it's quite safe, it isn't safe, and we don't need it. From what I've seen of the figures on the ash, that's terrible. And there's such a thing as duty of care now. And this council have failed in that terribly.
I don't see any environmental problems insofar as that those sites are regulated by the Environment Agency, and they would be operated to either waste management licence conditions or conditions of conditions of an authorisation. We know that during the course of this year, in terms of burning waste as a fuel, there's a new European directive that will come into force which will dramatically cut emission levels from waste burning. So that I don't particularly see any environmental problems with either operation.
My main concerns are, I've got two small children, and I don't think they've really looked into the health impact of having an incinerator so close to a community where children are growing up.
We've had 4 GP surgeries, including Newcastle University surgery, and Newcastle North Primary Care Group executive have come out demanding a public inquiry. We have 2 doctors' surgeries at the top of Heaton Road onto Shields Road, calling for a public inquiry. These are medical experts, they're doctors.
If you think of the chimney being the main source of emissions, the exhaust plume comes out of the chimney, and it will not so much affect those people who live who have allotment gardens straight under the chimney. But there would be a point somewhere quite close, but not immediately near the chimney, where the plume actually hits the ground, and that may be 200, 300 yards away from the chimney. So that is where the emissions from the chimney would actually most affect people. And if that happens to be within, for example, a residential area, then the whole population in that residential area could be affected. We know from research evidence that people who have pre-existing chest conditions, for example, would be more likely to have an effect. But also children tend to be more susceptible to these kind of things.
It quite scares me because not enough research has been done into the toxins that are coming out of an incinerator, and this is an issue across the country about incinerators. They just sort of don't seem to want to invest the energy and actually the money in researching what these chemicals can do to people.
Well, I think the council do care about public health. I think that there's a view that says the burning of waste is safe, and that these proposals will not have an adverse effect on health.
It obviously depends on the heavy metal. Dioxins, there's quite good evidence experimentally in animals of the adverse effects of dioxin ingestion, including things like cancers and so on. Relatively little evidence in humans, but a very strong scientific consensus that because dioxins accumulate in the body, we should be trying to reduce exposure to the absolute minimum.
All combustion processes, and that includes us driving around in cars, all industries, and that includes incinerators, emit substances that we know are harmful to health. And the Department of Health and the Department of Environment have set standards which, in their judgment and with the best evidence at this point in time, they think is reasonable to accept. If we still want to drive cars, if we still want to have industry, it is acceptable to have these limits.
The reclamation plant has to conform to a waste management licence issued by the agency. The agency inspect the facility and obviously, you know, do an inspection report. That's a regular occurrence, and you know, if there's anything that's that they see as being wrong and not conforming to the licence, you have to obviously put that right. I mean, you know, in terms of it may be a minor problem, you know, it could be a major problem, you know, but the agency inspect the facility as a sort of independent regulatory government body.
The Byker incinerator has recorded 20 consecutive infringements of authorisation, so monitoring doesn't make it safe from the Environment Agency. It only records breaches in authorisation.
When the warm weather comes on, we are going to suffer terrible. And I didn't have asthma till I came here. And I've got me inhalers and that now. And there's a lot round here have got inhalers. A lot of kids as well. A lot of children's got inhalers.
I'm in the unfortunate position of having an allotment with the ash, the incinerator ash on it. I have 8 vegetable beds, and each of them is surrounded by about a 10-inch layer of ash, of incinerator ash. And every day we eat something from the allotment. So I rang the council up, and I spoke to 2 people in the council environmental department and said, shall I eat this food? Is it safe to eat, or shall I throw it away? If it was yours, would you eat it? Oh yes, they said. And I said, would you give it to your grandchildren? And they a bit more humming and hawing, and then they said, well, it's probably got nothing in it, so yes, I would give it to my grandchildren. It's almost impossible to get anything in writing from our council. I got in touch with the public food analyst, and he was absolutely, well, shocked isn't the word for it. He was very, very annoyed. But I got a phone call saying, we have spoken to the public analyst and he wants to take specimens of all the food in your freezer and in the allotments. And he said, under no condition must you eat the food.
And what we've done is we've commissioned an independent study by the University of Newcastle to analyse and report back on the ash as to what they think should be done, whether or not at the end of the day it can be, it is a problem or it isn't a problem. But they've recently undertaken the sampling, and they will, report back, over the coming weeks.
We have sampled on 17 sites across Newcastle with the information given to us by Newcastle City Council, and we have sampled in such a way that we have selected allotments where only in 1 year a load of ash was received, so that we can look at a trend over time if there is any. We've also sampled all those allotments that received more than 100 tons in total, just because of the magnitude of the amount. And we are looking in these samples for heavy metals, arsenic, and for dioxins and furans. If there is contamination on the allotment path, we would then need to discuss and come to a judgment whether or not it is likely that from the actual material on the path, material could have been incorporated into the soil. And depending on that, we would make recommendations about what can or should not be grown on these paths, on these allotments.
Obviously, there's a view that the material can be used. You mentioned what will happen to it in the future. Well, we'll be looking at using it as a material. I mean, obviously, if the university study found that was anything untoward with it, we'd have to look at that. But, I mean, in terms of the future, I mean, clearly, it would be, you know, it's seen as a potential useful material. Rather than having to landfill it, it's seen as a potential useful material.
I mean, the government does not admit that the toxins coming from incinerators are harmful. They will not say that they're harmful. I mean, in some ways, they're expanding their incineration across the country with, I can't remember how many incinerators they're going to set up around the country, but it just doesn't seem like the way forward in the 21st century, really.
And of course, this has been spread on paths and allotments, hasn't it, over the years as well?
The ash has been spread on the paths and allotments, which is another matter. I mean, we're now here, and there's actually been spread in the parks as well, Jesmondina and places like that.
I mean, it's not a sensible way to treat waste. A sensible way to treat waste is actually to reduce and reuse and recycle and get the whole population involved.
So I don't think we wanted the message that all incineration is necessarily bad. It would probably be best not to do incineration, but if we have no other option, we will have to incinerate some of our waste.
And what we should be doing is investing our time and energy and money in looking at how we can make the best of our resources and make the best of our environment and make our children's lives healthy.
There is a view that says, well, that strategy relies too heavily on incineration, and we should see more in terms of recovery. So there's a wider debate on that. But, you know, I believe that the city's strategy is quite balanced. We've got waste to energy, composting, and we'll have materials recovery. And we were talking about recovering 75% of the city's waste stream, which is a phenomenal amount of material to be taken out.
Problem is, at the minute, it's like people go, oh, it's like the council seems to have this idea that people in Byker won't recycle at source, but they haven't tried it. They're just dismissing us as people who are sick or something in some way, that we can't work, oh, this is a plastic bottle and this is a glass one, so I put the plastic one in there and the glass one in there. You know, it's really patronising attitudes about people who live in Byker, and they're perfectly capable of recycling at source, and that basically is the only way forward for us to learn and start recycling at source and teach people and teach our children to do it, so it becomes our culture to do that.
I suppose that bottom line messages are landfill is probably the least attractive option. Controlled incineration, done with appropriate safeguards, we will almost certainly have to have for a number of years. But the siting and functioning of incinerators is a key public issue that needs to be debated openly. and we need to shift our overall focus into reduce, reuse, recycle.
If the council had its way, that plant would be being rebuilt now. They would have signed the contract already. So we've at least made them stop and think.
What we said, we'd go back to the working group and try and clarify some of the issues and see how best they could be progressed. But until we've gone through that, that procedure as such in terms of the discussions, we wouldn't progress the contracts. So we're waiting to go back to, the working group. There's a meeting of the working group scheduled for the end of this month.
Unless people have the say, then they're not going to understand all of the issues relating to pollution. And if the council goes ahead without consultation, the impact of this incinerator is going to be horrific on the people of Newcastle and Gateshead.
And how Ralph Ryder described it when we had him up to talk to local people the other week, was that it's like putting a hand grenade in the centre of human biology, and that's quite a frightening concept, really.
Well, we're damned well going to make sure that there's going to be representation and a fight back within Byker. No matter what they try and do, we're going to make sure that they're not going to get away with this targeting of people who are vulnerable, who are struggling with low incomes, who are struggling with worse conditions than people in the rest of the city.
Fighting is losing battle as far as I know, as far as I can see.
So if we're not going to burn the stuff, we will have to landfill some of it because we're not going to be able to recycle everything. And that's a fundamental step back, which is saying reduce, reuse, recycle.
I just think, cheap way of getting rid of rubbish, burn it.
Empowering ordinary people to decide what happens in their community. That's what we want. We want a say in what goes on in our community.
If we're going to win this thing, then it's up to us. And each one of us is going to have to do all that we possibly can towards that end.
I think I've done all I can now. It's not for the want to try, mate, because we've done a lot about it. We've just got to wait and see what happens now.
Environmentalists say a further 4 entirely new incinerators are planned for the region, including one in South Northumberland. So the row brewing in Byker could be just a sign of things to come.